Let me know when you're ready. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yes. I first learned about universal design because of my background in education. So I know more about universal design for learning, but then I became a designer. And that's why I started learning about accessibility and universal design, specifically for web design and app design and all of that, okay? So these are the goals that I've prepared for today. My idea is to give a bit of like a crash course on accessibility and universal design. I want us to learn the basics, which is mainly what is accessibility and what is a universal design. I'll give you already a few tips and guidelines. We'll talk about some legalities, and then you see this weird words here. They're related to accessibility, and we're going to see what they are. And then I want to make something clear. It's not that I am an accessibility and universal design expert. It's that I've been lucky enough to work in environments that favor accessibility and worry about universal design, and I've learned through them. What I want to do here is teach you a bit of what I know and hopefully inspire you to keep learning. And hopefully after this, we can keep learning together because I still have lots to learn. So yes. And then I want us to have actionable steps for you to start your accessibility and universal design journey as early as tomorrow, if you want. Okay. So keep in mind, everything I'm going to say is a reduced version, every description, every explanation because of the time constraints, okay? But we're not going to waste more time and we're going to jump right into it. So what is accessibility? There are many definitions. If you look at the dictionary, you'll find something like this. Something accessible is something capable of being reached, used, seen, or understood. When we're talking about web accessibility and accessibility in UX UI design, what we mean is that we're making digital tools and media that are accessible to as many people as possible, including those people with disabilities, okay? Might sound similar to inclusivity. The difference is that accessibility is, it worries specifically about people with disabilities, okay? Inclusivity might be like a broader spectrum, and we're also talking about gender, ethnicity, religion, and all of that. Accessibility is focused specifically on people with disabilities. Therefore, if we want to find resources or courses and learn about making websites accessible for people with disabilities, we'll use the word accessibility instead of inclusivity. We'll find more resources like that. And what is universal design? Universal design, we have here the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. To me, universal design is the best approach to ensure accessible, inclusive, ethical, and high quality design. It actually comes from architecture. If you want to learn about it, like the story is very interesting. And I think the term was actually coined by Ronald Mace, an architect. But what we aim with universal design is not to create a product. Let's see, we have here an example. So we don't want to create a product and then create another separate product that is for a specific sector of society with a specific needs and their specific context. What we're trying to do with universal design is design something that can be used by everyone, okay? Without the need for us to make, I don't know the word in English, like something specific for someone else, yes? So why should we care about accessibility? Hopefully just because, like, we're trying to be, and we shouldn't need any reason to be decent human beings and like to design for everyone. You will see a lot of explanations, like it's actually really good for business, yes, but hopefully that will not be our first motivation. But it is very good for business, actually. And let's play a little game. There is actually a really big market for accessibility. try to guess how many people with disabilities are in the world. Just a wild guess. Try to not use Google. And I don't see the chat. So if anyone writes answers.
So we have 66%, and I'll guess 1 billion.
Actually, yeah, it's 1.3 billion people. Like that's the global market, I guess. And I actually think is like 3 times the amount of people in the US. So we would be designing for 3 USs. I don't know. Is there a plural? Yes. So that's one reason. If that doesn't do it, lawsuits might. There are actual laws that protect people with disabilities. They have a right for websites and apps to be accessible for them, and we can get sued if we don't do it. That's a good reason. We do end up with better products and with better designs. When you start learning about accessibility, you'll see that many places say that it's actually been demonstrated that you end up having like better SEO, pages and apps load faster. Like there is a bunch of things. Like as we improve for accessibility, we're improving for like the general experience of everyone. And then the last reason, it's actually easy. Like I'm going to give you tips and a few guidelines. They're not complicated at all. They're not putting like a bunch of extra time in our process. I was actually a little bit embarrassed when I was learning about it because it's so easy and I'm like, damn, I wasn't doing it before. But that's good news for us. It means that we can start doing it as soon as we learn it. So accessibility is essential for some and useful for all. There's a sentence that you're gonna hear a lot when we talk about accessibility, and it's 100% true. Let's see. We're gonna see types of disabilities because I want us to know for who and for what we're designing, okay? I'm saying for who and for what because the people that have visual, hearing, cognitive, and physical disabilities, many of them use assistive technologies. So we're not only designing for these people, but we're also designing for assistive technologies that they use. We're going to start with visual. What they're going to use are screen readers, which I put a picture. Yes, a screen reader looks something like this. It's like a plugin. And if you click it, it's going to read what's on the page, okay? And many of them have like many different functionalities, like this one, for example. You can stop it, replay it. There is translation. There are different types of software that do this. This is text-to-speech. Then we have Braille. I don't know in English. Braille in Spanish, Braille displays, which basically translate on-screen text into Braille. Sorry. And then we have a screen magnification softwares, which what they do is like magnify a part of the screen for people to see better. What we're gonna do to design better for people with visual disabilities is, first of all, provide alternative text for image and media. What is alternative text? You know, sometimes when you're like, when you put the mouse over an image, like a little text pops up. This is the alt text, okay? The screen readers read the alt text. They're telling the people with a visual disability, this is what the picture is, okay? So it's very important to write appropriate alt text. It has to be descriptive. How to say it? It has to be descriptive of the context. Like, why is that image there? Okay, and we're gonna describe that. Mind you, we don't really need to write alt text on all images. Like if it's just purely decorative and we're not using that image for anything important, like information that is important, we don't need to use alt text. Like for example, if we're using an icon or just a decorative banner, we don't need to use alt text. But careful, if we're not using alt text, we're just gonna leave it empty. Vale? Because what happens if we remove it all together is that the screen reader might read this, which can be very annoying for the person using it, okay? Another tip is that we're going to use semantic HTML, and we're going to use it right. That means that if something is a header, I'm going to mark it as a header. If something is a footer, I'm going to mark it as a footer. There is a lot of, it's very common to not use titles, headers, and subheaders with the proper HTML label. Sometimes because it looks better, like the H3 subheader looks better than the H1. Just put first H1, H2, H3, and then change the styling of it, because the screen reader is gonna read it as you label it. Sufficient color contrast, as Julie was saying, someone mentioned it. This goes without saying. Hopefully we have that covered in the UX UI 101. Careful with putting text on top of images, and if we do, let's make sure it's still readable. And then something very important with people that have color blindness. They rely a lot in good UX and UI design. So we're gonna avoid giving information through color, because if we have a colorblind person, they're not getting the information. We're gonna be a little bit more creative and use patterns and textures, or like whatever, but color cannot be the only way in which we're giving information. See? Let's go to hearing. So the assistive technologies that we're gonna have is, well, hearing aids and cochlear implants, sign language interpretation, and captioning, yes? And I'm gonna give you the presentation so you have more time to read it. I just wanna make sure we see the tips, the design tips. What we're gonna do to design for them is to provide captions and subtitles on video and multimedia content. YouTube does it very well. Offer transcripts for audio content. Careful, because sometimes some apps can create automatically the transcript. Make sure to edit it after that, because usually they will not use proper punctuation. They will not capitalize the I's, for example, and that makes a really bad experience for the person that is reading. Avoid autoplaying just as soon as you enter on a website or an app, and then use visual indicators alongside audio ones. Outlook does that, for example, when you get an email, you hear the notification, and then on the tab, you see like the red circle. So that's an example. Are you seeing? Isn't it easy? Like, this is not complicated at all to do. Like, when I was first learning about all of this, I'm like, okay, color contrast, alt text, captions, transcript, like cognitive disabilities. When we're talking about cognitive disabilities, think it's a very wide range. Think it can be memory loss, Alzheimer's, it can be ADHD, autism. They're sometimes also called learning disabilities. So dyslexia, for example. Because it's so broad, they're going to use many different tools. Text-to-speech softwares, for example, grammar and spelling, pop-up blockers. I use that. And what we're going to do to design better for them is, first of all, design has to be clear, simple, and intuitive. Like someone said in the chat, simple is better. I don't know what you said, but yes, exactly. Like, it has to be intuitive. Let's make sure also that the users know where they are. Let's not put it on them to understand in which part of the process they are, in which part of the website or app they are. Let's give them context, and let's keep them informed about the context. Avoid flashing animations. Just, they might trigger seizures, migraines. It's just not, I don't know. I personally hate them. Language, that is very important. Be careful with idioms, jargon. Is that the word? Like too high level words, too specific words. It has to be plain and clear. I read in a course, I was taking an accessibility course, and they had a tip. They said that a 9th grade level of speech is the best to make content understandable and interesting. So that might help us. Break content into chunks. This is an example of Shopify. Amazon also does that. If I have to make them do a bunch of steps, why not do a progressive disclosure? And we first show the contact information, and then we show the delivery method instead of just throwing all the information to the user. Very important, don't make information disappear. So for example, this happens a lot when we're designing forms. Sometimes we write this text inside the form. And when the user starts writing, the text disappears. Let's just move it outside and let's not make it disappear. Okay, this is another example of do not convey meaning just with color. If we didn't have this symbol here, we would have to rely on them seeing the color red to understand that there is something wrong. If we add an icon, we're telling them, hey, pay attention to something. To what? To this. And it's also a very clear, plain, and simple instruction. And avoid short time constraints for completing actions. Like sometimes you have like 60 seconds to complete the checkout. If you can avoid that, please do. If you cannot, then give more time. Yes. And then we have physical disabilities. The assistive technologies also vary a lot. It depends on the physical disability. We have voice recognition software, Alexa, for example, or Siri. Switch devices, they might look very different. It's buttons that replace the mouse and keyboards, eye tracking systems, which are now used even in social media to track our engagement, to what are we looking at the screen, and then on-screen keyboards. The guidelines that we're going to use to design for accessibility for physical disabilities is, this is a very simple text. Try to design for keyboard use only. And the way you test this is like you put your mouse aside and you try to access and do every step of your app on your website just with a keyboard. Can you access every important step? Can you access every place on your website just with a keyboard? No, then we need to improve the accessibility. Provide large clickable areas. Let's not put like a small button or like a small click here sentence with like size 11 in you know, the word size 11. And then again, avoid short time constraints for obvious reasons. If you have to use them, try to give plenty of time. So these were just a few tips that I wanted you to have to like, I don't know, like you'll tell me what you think, but I don't think they're that complicated. I think they are tips that as soon as you learn a bit about them, you can start implementing them on your design and they immediately make the whole experience better. Remember that I said there are laws for accessibility and like people with disabilities have rights and laws that protect them. Where do we check those? Many countries follow the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, so that we should check that. That's interesting. And then be careful because, for example, if you're a freelance and you're designing an app, like you're in the US, but you're designing an whatever product that is going to be used in another country, I'm pretty sure that you have to follow the laws in that country, the accessibility laws. How to know what are those laws? If you click on this link, I think I heard something.
Someone in the chat asks, which buttons on the keyboard are used to navigate a page, tab or the arrow keys? And is it different for Android, Mac, Windows?
I don't think it's different. I'm not sure, but ¿dónde está? Yes, so the arrows, I don't know in English, the enter and the tab, but also they have to be able to write. Okay, so that's why sometimes we have on-screen keyboards. You see it here? Yeah. Does that answer your question? I think yes. If not, we can keep talking about it, no problem. Oh yeah, where to check what are the laws that apply in your country or the country for whom you are designing the product. Excuse my English. If you go to this link, there you'll see a table and it lists different countries, and next to it there is a link to the law, the disability law of that country. Okay, so it depends on what you're working. If you're working in the US, they have it listed here, but if you're creating products for other countries, it's interesting to check that. Yeah. And careful, this is serious. I remember, what was it? There was this case back in 2006 against Target, and it was like a precedent in web accessibility. Because I think in 2006, the Target's website was not accessible to screen readers. So they got sued. And I think they had to pay like 6 million or something like this. I think when Netflix started, they didn't have captions. So the National Deaf Association sued them, and they had to pay like 700K. And I think even now there is a pending case against Amazon because I think their website is not accessible for screen readers. So we are protecting our butts, designing for accessibility. So to continue learning, to know more tips, to know more guidelines, this is what we're going to do. There is this thing called, I wrote the definitions because when I was first learning about it, it took me forever to like learn the difference. There is a W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. It's an international community that creates like standards for the web. In this international community, they created the Web Accessibility Initiative, which focuses on making the web accessible for people with disabilities. And they do that through the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a set of guidelines, recommendations, and tips on how to design for accessibility. And it's not just for designers, so you can share it. It's also for developers and coders. It's for everyone working with digital media and creating stuff for the internet and for the web. And so it's a really good place to start, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. If you don't want to feel overwhelmed, there are 4 main pillars of these guidelines, and they're known as the POUR, which mean perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Our websites, our products, our apps have to be perceivable. That means our users have to be able to see and read them. They have to be operable, understandable, and robust. Robust makes reference to we have to be able to use websites with assistive technologies. Okay. If you click on the link here, it's going to take you to a website that talks about each item, talks about the P, the O, the U, and the R with a specific steps and a specific guidelines to design for each of these 4 pillars. Vale? And what time is it? I was faster than I expected. Oh my God, I always worry that I'm not gonna have time. So I was like, these are the guidelines.
Great.
Do you want to see? Let me show you. This is, it's a great resource. Designing for accessibility. And here you have each of the 4 pillars of the WCAG. Perceivable. Well, this is for universal design for learning, but it applies. Our users need to see and hear information. Our users have to be able to navigate information independently of their preferred tools. They have to be able to understand it, and they have to be able to use it with assistive technologies. Yeah. And if you click on each item, they explain to you for each pillar of the 4 guidelines, add text descriptions, captions, provide sufficient contrast, a little bit of an explanation, and even more resources here to like keep learning and building on your knowledge. So it's a pretty complete resource. Yeah. What else? Let me see. I don't see questions. I mean, I don't see the chat. We can start the questions now if you want, or because I worry that I went too fast in some parts. If you want me, if anyone wants me to go back and explain in more depth something else. What is next?
In our social, we have monthly social. Someone mentioned about alt text. Can you give us some tips about how to write the alt text? Like what should we pay attention to? Like, is it more like a descriptive or you know, just like what we're trying to, the language and the tone we should use?
Totally. Thank you. I added a link that has good examples. When we're writing alt text to describe the images, we have to think of what the image conveys. And whatever we describe, it has to be in relation to the context of the web or the environment. So for example, I'm going to give you the PPT, and you'll see this link. I'm going to take you here, and it has examples of good alt text. Imagine we put this picture on a website. The alt text that we're going to use is going to depend on what we're using this picture for. So for example, if we're using it to talk about research turnout for track tryouts, these would be a good alt text. Yes, Harvard Stadium with 2 lone runners bounding up the steps. That's the information we're trying to convey with the picture. If we're talking about renovation projects in the Harvard Stadium, we'll describe the picture as Harvard Stadium with cracked concrete pillars. Yeah, so why are we using the image for? What are we trying to convey with the image? That is what we have to describe in the alt text. If it's purely decorative image and it doesn't really matter, like we're using it just for aesthetic reasons, we don't have to include the alt text. Yes. And remember, if we don't include the alt text, it has to be in this way. We'll just leave it empty instead of completely deleting the, how do you call it? The label? I don't know. Because if not, if we delete it, the screen reader might read this. The title of the image. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
And personally, I have a question about tips of communicating accessibility with especially front-end engineer. Like, what do you have any suggestion on that one?
I don't know if I'm understanding the question.
So
Communicating
because in order to implement a lot of items you mentioned, you the final product relied on the front-end engineer
I
to,
see.
yeah.
See, this starts a conversation for me. Who is in charge of making sure something is accessible? You know, like, are you in charge to make sure the front end developer does these steps or knows these things? Is it something we should all learn? Like, should the developer already know these things? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I happen to work in environments in which people know about accessibility, so I haven't had this issue. But the few times that I've had it, I just explain it. I'm just clear, like, hey, can we have a meeting? I think it has happened to me like twice or three times. I'm like, hey, can we have a meeting? And this needs to be changed for accessibility reasons. Like, it has to be accessible, period. You know, in a nice way. I'm not like, it has to be accessible, period. But I'm like, hey, this has to be accessible. I realized it's not. Can we change it? Can we improve it?
And how do you know that it's not accessibility friendly? Like, were you testing the
Ooh,
product?
yeah. This reminded me. Thank you for saying this, because I'm actually creating a Google Doc, which then, Jen, we talked about it. You'll help me. I don't know exactly where to put it, but I was creating a Google Doc with resources to learn about accessibility and then check your accessibility.
Mhm.
But resources, there are plenty. Like, if you want to check your color contrast, there are plenty of resources for that. And even like in here, like Google Slides, Excel, like a lot of these tools already have accessibility checkers on them. So I should have listed it in a slide. I didn't do it, I forgot.
Well, we'll
but
put
I
it
am
in the Slack channel.
yes. But thank you for reminding me. I am making a list of color checkers, for example, and like other accessibility checkers. Yes.
We have a question about how much should we rely on accessibility overlays?
How much should we rely on accessibility? What?
Overlays. I'm not sure. Are we Leah? I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly. Do you want
It's Aurelia,
Aurelia, okay.
or like in, Aina, it's in Spanish Aurelia. But when you go on a website and there's that little, it's usually a blue circle in the lower right. It looks like a man, like in Da Vinci's pose, and then you click it and you can adjust the website for increased contrast or thing. It's not a checker. It's supposed to help people with disabilities, but I think that's kind of unfair because the designers have designed a non-accessible website and are relying on this overlay. It's almost like a plugin, and it's not on every website, but it's there.
That's the accessibility symbol. You mean a symbol of like a man that is like this?
Yep.
Arms. Yeah, it's the accessibility symbol. Sometimes it might be. I'm not sure if I'm 100%. If I know 100% what you're referring to, but sometimes you can add. How do you call it? Like, you can add. I don't know how to call it. Like plugins to change things from your design, like make the fonts larger or change the colors. That might not be necessarily a bad thing, to give the user freedom to change certain things.
But why can't it just be accessible from the design stage, as opposed to relying on that little symbol?
Yeah, it should be accessible from the design stage. Yes. If on top of that we want to offer options to personalize the experience and allow them to make the font larger or change color contrast, that's a plus. But yeah, like, everything has to be accessible from the get-go.
I'm going to look for, I was on another accessibility discussion. I'm going to look for this website, and
okay, yeah.
You can see what I'm talking about. I think it was.
Are you saying it was it because it was not an accessible web But then you click that and it makes it accessible, or
Yep. I'm gonna
Mm.
paste it in the chat, and then since you're sharing, you can click it. It's in the chat now.
Mhm. Let me, where's my, there. Let's see this. Oops, it opened somewhere else.
That's the problem with 2 monitors.
See.
So
But if not, I just see the presentation and I feel like I'm talking
yeah,
alone.
so it's still loading, and then it'll be in the lower right, I think, of the video, or I don't know, maybe it's that red dot. I don't know. I don't even see it here.
I think if you keep scrolling down, it will show up eventually.
Oh, well, that's not great either.
I have it.
Mhm.
Oh,
We'll see if it pops up. Maybe it is something I don't know, which is probably.
Or maybe it's Chrome. I'm using Google Chrome, and I think you're using is it?
Do you see it?
Yeah, I can see it, but I'm using
Oh,
Chrome.
then maybe you want, do you want to share? Show it?
Sure.
see it there.
This
Oh,
one.
so now we're establishing that it's not even in every browser. So that's
Yeah.
another problem.
Yeah.
Ooh,
So you can click,
Mm.
yeah, I don't know the name of this overlay thing, but I've seen it.
Animation.
Animation will shut off any animation in case you have, you know, vestibular,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of motion sickness is vestibular
Mhm.
disorder. Yeah.
Interesting.
it looks like this.
Yeah. I call it the Da Vinci pose from Da Vinci's illustration.
Oh, there it is, the little man. Okay.
The little
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, that wasn't showing up for me.
Oh, so the designers were relying on you, Aina, of using a browser that would use that plugin. So there you go.
Mhm.
It's a fail.
Mm-hmm. I see what you mean. Accessibility has to start at the beginning of
Yeah.
our design process, period. We have to include people with disabilities in our user research during the testing stages. Like it's an ongoing thing. And it has to be from the get-go. And like it's not that complicated at all. Like it really isn't.
I'll give
Or
that.
at least I think so, but I don't know, like you'll tell me, like you've seen the guidelines and you've seen the tips. It's not anything extraordinary that we cannot do or that it changes a lot our process. It's so easy to include it in our process. And in the process, it improves the product. Like alt text is important also for SEO.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
And speaking of that, because I've worked in creative agencies where they did branding. So their branding for one project I worked on was a yellow background with white copy on it, a light yellow. And we were so far along and had branded already with that. So even before you're designing the usability, if you're working in branding and you're not accessible, then you're too far along if you've already sold that logo to the client.
Mm-hmm.
And the color, you know, all the colors that you're using, and then you find out, oh gosh, red, green.
Which, yeah. that continues the question, like who is in charge? You know, it's all of us. Like who has to learn about it? It's all of us. We can have an accessibility expert check what we're doing. That is something that we do in a lot of the projects that I work on. Like we know all about accessibility and we keep learning about it because again, it's not like I'm an expert. I'm just been lucky to work in environments that focus a lot on accessibility, and I learn a lot because of that. And I take courses and I learn on my own. But even with all of that, we have accessibility experts, and most of them are like people with disabilities, like visual disabilities or whatever, and then they will check our products. This happened to me recently. Like, I tried to do a course as accessible as possible. I still wrote, one of our accessibility experts, and I'm like, hey, can you run a test through it? There were still things and mistakes that I missed, so
We have
that's
we had a design review at one of the places where I worked, and it was for general design, good design, but also there was an accessibility area that they would write us about the tips, content, accessible content for but that I think that should be the part of, if any big orgs do design review, where there's like, are you using the right colors from the design system? Well, what if your design system is not accessible? That's why I'm saying, like, really from the beginning, it has to be.
From the beginning and everywhere, because then I also learned, are our work environments accessible? Like, I create Excel sheets and presentations and documents for people that I work with. Are those accessible? It's everywhere. It has to be everywhere. It has to be, and as I learn about it, I try to put it in everything I do. Like, I don't only try to do accessible websites and apps, but if I'm creating documentation to share with someone that I'm working with, is that Google Docs accessible? Like, am I using the proper titles and headers and
It could be even like in an airport where you go, let's say if you're mobility challenged and you're in a wheelchair, that means when you check in, the screen can't be at the height of a quote unquote average person. It should be lower, so someone can access it if they're in a wheelchair.
I didn't hear. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear.
Oh, I was just saying, even
I don't know if it's my computer that it's
in the physical environment, it should also be accessible. So screen should be,
yes.
Yeah.
That's where universal design comes from, actually, from architecture and from realizing, like, are we making accessible places, cities, streets? Like, as I keep learning about it, now I see it everywhere. I was back in my home country for a month, and I went to the store that I used to go to, and now through the accessibility lens, I'm like, this is an accessibility nightmare. Like, everything is so narrow, like you cannot walk properly. The lights are like flashing everywhere. It's super loud. Yeah. And same with work environments, offices.
Movie theaters here in New York area now have they have like some wheelchair access seating in the movie theaters. So that's good. So you might have like an empty spot or a bigger spot, for someone that comes in. But one of my favorites is something like, because I live in an urban atmosphere. So now curb cuts, which was originally, I believe, for people on wheelchairs, it helps me with my grocery cart.
Yes, like that's one of the examples of universal design in architecture. Like, you can have stairs, which are accessible for some, or you can have a ramp. Does it call a ramp? Which is accessible for everyone. Yeah. And in regards to the cinema, it reminded me to a story of, it was in I want to say my hometown, I don't know, in Spain. This Disabled People Association were complaining because in cinemas, the rows for wheelchairs were too close to the screen. So like, they could only sit there, and it was very annoying because like they had to be like this looking at the screen,
Horrible.
So do we make a row? That is universal design. Do we make a design specifically for these people in this sector with these chairs, or do we design a whole cinema theater that can cater to everyone. That's basically universal design. Like, we're trying to find one empathetic solution that caters to as many people as possible. And through the accessibility guidelines, like if we follow the guidelines and if we follow the tips, you know, like that's one way to do it. Yeah. But it's a shift of mindset. I had in my family blind people and deaf people, you know, and growing up, I don't know, when I was younger, now that I've grown up, well, not now that I've grown up, for a while I've been a grown up, but you know, when you're an adult, you start seeing things differently. And like one of the things that I saw differently is like, they're usually, like disabled people are made to like adapt to our environment and to our context. I feel like in my family, like they had to adapt more to us than maybe us to them. There were some you know, like there are adaptations, and there are things that you have to do when you live with a blind and a deaf person. But in general, like in society, it was kind of expected, you know, like we make accommodations for them, and then they would figure it out how to adapt and live with the rest of society, instead of creating societies, spaces, physical and digital, that are accessible for everyone. Like, I don't know what is your industry. Mine is education. If someone else works in banking and another one does a grocery store app and another one does like a cinema ticket app, we're touching so many different sectors of society, so many things that we use on the daily. And if we don't make them accessible, like just imagine the experience.
You would lose business.
And yeah, you lose business. Of course you lose business, and you risk a lawsuit because it has to be accessible. Like there are laws. It has to. Yeah.
What have you worked mainly in government agencies? Because I feel that in government agencies, you know, that the laws mandate that everything has to be accessible.
Yes, not now, but a lot of my experience has been in government as an educator in Spain, mostly. Like that's where I was teaching in public school, and yeah, we do have to follow, I guess. Yeah.
Because I think
and now I work in an environment that is focused on accessibility, and I'm very lucky for that because I'm learning a lot.
Yeah. In the private sector, I think unless you give them a scare of the lawsuits.
Yeah.
I was working on an internal product, and even someone said to me, we don't hire any people with disabilities. Yeah, yeah, wow. I didn't stay very long after that. But
that's why I had one slide, like, why should we care? Because that is a question that I see learning about it. Like if I get into a course and if I read an article, like in a lot of places, they write a paragraph like, why should you care? And it's like, what do you mean? Because like that is the right thing to do, you know? But yeah, you have to explain to businesses, kind of like convince them, but not really. Like it's actually really good to design for accessibility. There is a big market. We do end up with better products.
Hello.
Again, it's not complicated. Like,
sorry to interrupt. I have a question related on this. So we talk about the impact and outcome. I think my question is, how do you measure the impact or the outcomes of the project that you designed with a good access?
I believe it's better to include I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
The question is, how do you measure the outcome or the impact of the design?
The impact is, I'm assuming what you mean, the impact should be that people can access our product, that the product is accessible. And to measure that, we have to include them in the design process, in the user research, in testing the products, and then if we can, like having a professional check it.
Oh,
I,
so
Lin Yu, are you thinking, I would love to know this too, to have metrics
yes.
so that, you know, you could say to your boss, well, this many more people access the site.
Oh, like
Mm.
business metrics.
Yeah.
Ah,
Oh, because that's all they know is money and metrics.
yes, yes. That there is a lot of information about it. There is a lot of statistics. I haven't read anything that is like, well, it's bad for business, you know, like actually everywhere I read is the contrary. But it's a good question. Like the product that I made, that I'm making accessible, how do I measure? Do you mean, for example, against a non-accessible product that I've made that is more successful?
I think it can be a comparison before and after you have been improved the accessibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
if there's some metrics that can support the design decision, that will be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do users, when they sign on, identify themselves as a person with a disability?
To
I don't know.
websites?
Yeah, I mean,
If
think
we don't
about,
ask for that information,
yeah, like in retail, like let's say you're selling jeans,
I
and
don't
if
think
you,
so.
I don't know.
I mean, you don't want to. It's tricky, like, because some people might find it offensive. Like even when
Sure.
like applying for jobs, you have to feel like your like gender identity. Some people find it uncomfortable to do it. So I think it'll be very difficult to ask people to do it. But I guess there's a metric, probably with Cookie or something, you can ask your developer to track if the website has been used by like a screen reader or something like that. Maybe that part is possible. But not, I don't think disclosing this by the user themselves is
They would have to, what they call it, self-identify. I'm also looking for a job, so I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So you can't ask a user to self-identify, but I guess you could take a metric on how many people using assistive technologies have access.
Yeah, I would imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are going to run out of time. So if you ladies or guys have any more questions, feel Aina, would you mind like sharing your LinkedIn so people can maybe send you an invite?
Yes, I'm like Aina Serra
Yeah.
on
And
LinkedIn.
anyone
And I'm gonna share the document, okay? And
yes.
I would like it to be open, like not just me, because as I said, I'm still learning. It's a process. So if any of you keeps learning, finds an interesting article or a course or whatever, we can all add to it.
Yes.
And keep having these conversations. Like I see they're very beneficial because I learn things that I didn't know from this conversation. So
yeah, and anyone who would like to like share your LinkedIn, feel free to put in a chat as well. And we have a skill flex session. If you have any like superpower you would like to share with us, please sign up, and we can always arrange like some time, and then you can do the presentation and teach us about or share your superpower with us. And our next event will be on October 26th, which is the last Thursday of October. And it will be in person. We're going to Umbridge, which is a big company located on, I think, on the west side of Houston. The meetup page is already online. If you haven't, feel free to sign up, and please join our Slack channel, which I will post on the chat right now. Thank you very much, and feel free to, I mean, it's not my place to say, but please send your questions to Aina if you have more questions. The conversation today was really good, and I'm happy to see everyone's like advocating for accessibility in your working area or in your life in general. Thank you, Aina, again, and Anyone else would like to say anything? Well, if not, that's it for today. Thank you very much, Aina, and thank you very much, everyone, for participating in the talk today. We'll see you,
Thank you.
26.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.